And now we just have a few moments for questions that you would like to pose to the panelists. And again, thank you both very, very much.
I'd just like to ask you to share your thoughts about the potential and maybe some of the hurdles relating to cooperative entrepreneurship based on your experiences and how you see our situation as African Americans, as Africans of the diaspora today, as compared to in Bois.
And can you introduce yourself?
I'm sorry, I'm Bruce Strickland with Local Leadership Academy.
Sure, I can take that one. And this is one of the things that we need to look at, looking at Du Bois, is economic cooperation and framing that one in a larger context of those kind of practices. And that is, we cannot, even the most well-meaning, idealistic people, the conflicts arise. If we look at, for example, the 19th century utopian, it's like Robert Owen, who tried to set up cooperatives, workers' cooperatives. They were, in some cases, quite successful, some were quite productive. If you look at the cooperative that was set up in New York, it ultimately became Oneida, right? So there seems to be some real potential in cooperative economic activity, but at the same time, cooperation, and this is something that I think Du Bois perhaps could have pressed a little bit harder on. I think he may have realized a bit more as he developed that cooperation is hard, it's difficult, it ends up there, even in the cooperative efforts, you find human conflicts over resources, human conflicts based upon unresolved gender issues, and so cooperation, I think, is an ideal we need to grapple with, we need to struggle with. I think that moving forward, we need to embrace an idea, but we also need to reflect upon some of the mistakes that people who in the past have engaged in cooperative activity have made. And one of them is not really addressing and bringing to the forefront some of those conflicts, particularly as it relates to gender and other kind of things. Okay, is that helpful? And Du Bois, if you look at his economic cooperation among the Negro Americans, he doesn't really go there.
And I'll just expand by saying, this is something I said earlier. Looking at South Africa now and what's going on there, we had all these Eastern Bloc trained so-called revolutionaries who are now big-time capitalists, who have reconstituted many of the old apartheid era labor laws. Cyril Ramaphosa, so-called revolutionary, is owner of a platinum mine where they oppress black people and workers. And so, I mean, this was in 2012. And by the way, Cyril Ramaphosa went to school where I taught. And so I just want you to understand that when we talk about human motives, and I want to say this to kind of to condemn them, because I think we're all subject to the same thing. I was in Liberia recently, and in Liberia was formed by freedmen after slavery, and those freedmen could not wait to get to Liberia so they could find some other people on whose neck they could place their boot. Okay? And that seems to be a human experience, right? I mean, the whole idea that somehow when we get the money, everything's going to be all right. So we have to account for greed and self-interest in anything that we do in the business world, because people can be greedy and people can be self-interested. And this whole idealistic idea that somehow, when I'm in charge, everything's going to be different, it's just not the case. In South Africa, there's a tremendous amount of pent-up consumer needs, unwanted, unrequited consumer needs that were given expression by something they call black empowerment, where all these black folks who had formerly been oppressed in places like Atlanta and UCLA during the struggle came back home and were able to extract from the economic system favorable treatment into buy businesses and stuff like that. They became very, very much about them and not about the struggle. And that's what's going on right there. I don't think that African Americans are excluded from that. So we talk about how we want to develop economically. I think we have to be real. We have to start with the idea that people can be greedy, that people can be self-interested, and try to build models, okay? And try to understand that we account for that when we build those models to take us forward.
Hi, I'm Mickens here at CAU. I'd like to ask both of you basic questions. It's very clear that P.T. Washington and Bois disagreed on a number of issues. But I want to focus on these economics. And I want to illustrate what that means with two people. You had George Washington College, who was a great inventor by world standards, who profited not at all. And he had a variety of reasons. Stated reasons were primarily business. And then you had someone who's also born in the 19th century who became a millionaire. Very few people know about Louis Latimer, who was one of the pioneers who became a millionaire. In some superficial sense, you would identify Carl with Washington and Latimer with Booker T. Washington in terms of their outlook on life, their sophistication, and how they analyze things. How do you think that has played out long term? Because I think we have a lot of that still going on now. You know, here at CAU and at many colleges, the emphasis is on get people jobs. The question is that really important we want to do? Without hours and things like that. Take that situation, let's say, back in the 19th century.
Thank you.
See if I can unpack your question, because it seems to be both a historical correct question as a prescriptive question about what young people should consider, students should consider doing now. So you're more, I'm sorry?
I said, forget about the students.
Forget about the students.
Forget about it and look at the application of Du Boisian and Washingtonian theory in relation to Carter.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's something one fall.
I'm not sure if this is a question or a comment. That's what I'm not quite sure of.
Okay. What would have been the consequences if either one of them had won the argument? If economics had gone the way of Washington, economics had gone the way of...
Well, you probably would have had, I would think that you probably would have had more property owning black people under a Du Boisian model than a Washingtonian model. And the reason is that what is required to secure property is the state. And to have zero access to the resources and protection of the state makes people who own property extraordinarily vulnerable. And if you look at black property ownership, in the latter part of the 19th century, it was increasing at a fairly steady rate until 1900, at a point at which it plateaued. And so Du Bois is pressing for black political access to the resources of the decision-making power and the protection of the state would have created an environment that would have allowed African Americans to be more secure in owning property and would have had greater resources to develop that property. Now, and if we look at the context of the early 20th century, African Americans would, in different means, through court cases and legal cases, try to use the state in order to advance their property interests in more subterranean ways that the Washingtonian approach would allow for. But I would say, as a whole, you have to understand economy in the context of political economy, and property in the basics of liberal theory requires the protection of the state and the role of economic actors in the state to both protect as well as to provide the context for them to continue to improve their property. So that's my case on that question.
I think I would not disagree with you, but I would say that I think that this question of role in this discussion between the two schools of thought, I think is, I'm not sure. I know that we're wrestling right now. Some of you might have heard a gentleman by the name of Hernando de Soto wrote a book, and he talks about the role that land plays in terms of, poverty getting poverty. And when you consider both the amount of actual land holding plus the promise of land in the aftermath of slavery, it's a hell of a lot of land. And you're right, of course, land ownership rights have to be codified in law. And you know that the laws were not favorable for African Americans at that time. Nonetheless, I think that it's hard to look at that loss and take that lightly. I think that's a very serious piece of land. We're working with black farmers now in the South, trying to convert who are losing their farms every day. And our land holdings now are just paltry compared to what they were in the aftermath of slavery and the potential that they would have had we gotten our 40 acres in a mule. So it's a tough question for me to just say this. It all comes down to having some more laws to protect us. Because we needed to have, I think the land also can provide you with the basis of exerting power in almost extra legal ways.
Thank you. I would also just like to point out that this false dichotomy of either you have political advancement or you have economic advancement is simply destroyed when you look at the fact that Booker T. Washington was part of the Atlanta University conferences, even after the souls of black folk. So there needs to be an understanding that this idea of Du Bois versus Washington is really superficially created. And the second point I would say that's really important in terms of understanding Du Bois is to look again at Soliloquy, his final piece of writing where he looks back at his life at 95 years old, and he talks about why he believes in communism and socialism. How did he get to that point from someone who was so advocating for the talented 10th and the rise? And I gotta say before you leave, Dean, I love the way that you broke down the hustler, the hands in the soil, and the talented 10th. I think those three ideas of, the so-called underground economy, and like, as students, you do somebody's hair, you cut somebody's hair, you braid somebody's hair, that's part of the underground economy. And that is something that we've always done. But I wanted to say that, why would Du Bois change from this idea of uplift and the talented 10th, and we need to train the top people to go to college, and we're going to lead? It's specifically because of what Dean Moses was saying, that, in his hour of need, when he was going to prison and tried for his communist activities, the talented 10th didn't stand up for him because they had too much to lose. So, it was those people who were in the jazz age economy, who were the hustlers and things, who came to his support and rescue in a way that the so-called talented 10th didn't. And that's not the only reason, but these are ideas of his that evolved over time and that were not nearly as simplistic as a lot of people paint out, the Booker T. Washington and W.B. Du Bois debate. It's gotten complicated in terms of how he viewed economy and economic uplift and political participation over time. And even though that did change, he understood that the core of it really has to do with consciousness of what black people's humanity means and should mean.